In one of my previous videos, I mentioned that I needed a backup solution for my ESX server, which is running a few VMware VMs. It's just a server in my lab, so I didn't want to spend any money for a backup solution. I just wanted a simple way to do backups. Found something called Relax and Recover that's included with most distributions, and it will let you actually do a backup and create an ISO that you can then restore to another machine or another hypervisor. You could take the VMware and back it up to a KVM hypervisor, or you could back it up to a different hypervisor. Any type of hypervisor that uses a CD-ROM to do the installation. Now, I was looking for Relax and Recover. There's a main page where it gives you some documentation on it, on how to do it. They're also available at GitHub. There's a man page that describes some of the options that you can use. The commands that we're going to look at mostly is just the make backup. And when you tell it to make a backup, it creates an ISO image that has the format of your hard disk, which is the partitions and the volumes and all that. And it somehow puts it onto this ISO. When you boot that ISO, it can recreate the layout of your hard drive on it. The second thing that it does is it creates a tar.gz file, which is a backup of all your files on the system. Now you can read through all this documentation, and it tells you all the different options you have for output. You can do your backup to an NFS share, a cifs share, which is Samba or Windows share. You can send it to FTP, FTPS. All of these are options where you can send the output of this backup to. And you can go on down and read some more there. There's some more options that you have. I don't use any of these options. Also at Red Hat, they have a whole chapter on Relax and Recover. Go through and read all that. And I'm going to give you just the basic things that I needed so that it creates an ISO for me so that I can take that and put it onto another hypervisor if needed. So if my VMware box crashes and I have to reinstall, I'll just take the ISO and rebuild the VM that was on there. Now I have two VMs that I'm going to use for testing here. This SRV001 and 002. 001 is running Fedora. I believe it's Fedora 36. 02 is running Alma Linux 8.5. So the top one here is the 01 box. The bottom one is the 02. And the actual rear application is a package that you can download and install. I'm copying from my notes here on the left. And copy that in. I didn't copy it over here. Okay, I gotta copy and come back over here. Oh, it's because I'm in tmux, so I have to hold the shift down when I hit the copy. Now, if you have a virtual machine or a physical machine even that is running under EFI, you have to install the grub2-EFI so that it works correctly. I'm going to go ahead and install it even though this is just a standard BIOS install. So I'm going to install those packages on both systems. And while that's installing, I will show you what I have on there. It's just a simple web server running on both. I got a web server and it says that it's Fedora server on SRV001. And if I go look at 002, it's the same thing. It's a different default page, but it says Alma Linux on SRV002. I'm going to come back out there. All right, we've got Breer installed on both machines. And if you go back to the documentation, there are lots of options you can put in for what you want to back up. And I found the ones that would work best for me. So on this first system, we're going to do a cifs mount, and it's going to be a physical mount on the box. So to do that, I need the cifs-utils, so I have to install those. Now again, this is only if you're going to create a mount on the box itself. I'm going to create a directory called mount backup as sudo. And then I'm going to mount a cifs mount. And that is on my NAS. You gotta go NAS. And it's under backup. And it's under rear. That you have to send it some options. The option I want to send it is the username. And I created a test user just for testing it. So we're gonna mount that under mount backup. And I will type the correct password this time. And I will type the correct password. So when I do a ls of my local mount backup, you see I've got files there. These files represent backups from other systems that I was testing. When rear does the backup, it's going to create a folder in here, which is the host name of the machine you're on. Like this one's name, SRV001, it will create a file called SRV001. Now the configuration file for rear is in etc rear, and it's called local.conf. And you have to do sudo because a normal user doesn't have access to it. And one of the things that it says here, they recommend that you create a file called site.conf. The file will hold the settings that you want. So don't use the local.conf, you'll use the site.conf. And the file doesn't exist, so you have to create it, and you have to create it as root. So I'm going to do nano etc rear site.conf. So if you go back and you read that documentation for those links that were listed before, That's not what I want. I got to copy. I'm in tmux, so I got to hold shift and I got to paste. Okay, in that documentation, it tells you the output type is ISO. That means we want to create an ISO file. The output URL is where we want to copy that file to. And we want to copy it to mount backup. And you have to use this format. It's the file : / and then the path, which is mount backup. The backup equal netfs tells it to use, it's not zip, it's tar. It tells it to use tar, and it makes a GZ format. The backup URL is where you want the backup files to be, which is the backup of all the files on the disk. And it's going to create a file called backup.tgz or some such. So once you've got this in your site.conf, you save it. And if you'll do man on the rear command, it gives you the general options here, and we're looking for the commands. And the command that we want is make backup. That's going to create the ISO that will be able to recreate your hard disk partitions and volumes. And then it'll also do a backup of the files that are on the hard drive. So if we do a sudo rear mk backup, now you may see some messages that says it can't find this or it can't do that. Don't worry about the error messages. You only have to be concerned if it says failure. If something fails, that means it wasn't able to do the actual backup. So this is generating an ISO file that it will then copy to mount backup, and then it will do a backup of the files and put it into a backup.tgz file, and it will also copy it to mount backup because that's what we specified in the site.conf file. All right, that completed, and it only took about a minute. So if we go and we look at that, we go and look at the files that it made over there, rear. It created the folder there, server srv01. And here's the ISO file that it created. And here's the backup file that it created. Now it creates these two separately. And there's an option later on that I'm going to show you that'll allow you to create them where it'll put the backup file actually onto the ISO. And somehow the program knows how to, it puts some information into the ISO so that the ISO knows it needs to look in /mount/backup to find the backup files. So if we look at our site.conf file that we created, and that wants a paste. We'll do that. So when it creates this ISO file, somehow it embeds into this file that when it boots and it wants to do a restore, it's going to look for /mount/backup. So that /mount has backup has to exist when you do the restore also. And going back, we can actually look into this backup.targz file. And it'll just show you the files that are being backed up. And we can mount this and look at it. Let's look over here. It's the one at the bottom. So it creates an ISO image with this ISO Linux. And using these files, it knows how to boot up. It knows how to go in and start the restore process. Okay, so that's one way of doing the rear backup. Okay, another way of doing the rear backup, we're going to do on the O2 box. We're going to create the site.conf file. So I have nano on this box, so this is Alma Linux. So I have to VI. And to do the backup on the second box, we're still going to tell it I put ISO. The difference is in the URL, we're going to tell it to go directly to the cifs mount. We're not going to create a mount on the box. We want rear to go directly to the cifs mount. And we have to pass it the username and the password that it's going to use to connect with. And the difference here is that instead of taking the backup and putting it into that backup.tgz file, we're going to take the backup and put it into the actual ISO in a folder called backup here. So the ISO:// says put it on the ISO, and the /backup says put it into the backup folder. And we have to pass those same options to the rear application. So we're going to save that. And we're going to do a sudo and run the backup again. So the only difference is that we did not create the mount point ahead of time. We're relying on rear to go in and connect to the mount point. And also remember that the ISO, when it boots, it's going to come up and it's going to try to connect straight to the cifs mount, because that's the way the config is on the machine here. Okay, so the backup's there, it's complete. You get some messages about broken symlinks, but you don't get a failure message. So that means that the backup completed. So if we go and we look to see what files were created, now there's a folder called sysrb002, and you notice that the backup file is not there. That's because it's in this ISO file. So if we were to mount that ISO, you see there's a folder here called backup, and it's got that backup.tgz file in it. So now we've got two backups. We've got one backup that we created from a /mount, and then we got another backup where we just let rear go out and do the actual connection. So now let's take a look at restoring those backups. The other hypervisor I have is XCP-NG. XCP runs on a physical box, and it has has some of the VMs on it that I use. But since I added a new file to that ISO share, I got to tell XCP to go in and rescan it. And that's under storage, and I hit rescan. It's doing its thing. And if I sort them here by name and look for that rear, I can see there's the rear srv001 file that I need. So now I'm ready to create a new VM. Select the closest thing to it, which is going to be Red Hat 7 in this case. Call this RV001. We're going to select an ISO. The ISO is rear srv001. I'm going to go next. We want to place it on this server. Give it 1 CPU. It had 4 gigs of RAM, so that's fine. The storage, it was 6 gigs. The default here is 10, so we'll leave it at that. And we'll hit next. It was on VLAN 40, so I have to put it on VLAN 40. Blah, blah, blah. Hit OK. And hit next. We don't want to start it automatically because we want to get a chance to see it create. So you have to look down at the bottom. It says provisioning, creating, and all that. So it's actually making the VM for it. And I can go up here and find it in the list. It's right there. It is not running. I'm going to go to the console for it. I'll maximize this screen. And I will hit start. And is there a way to make this larger? Let's undock it. And stretch it out. You got to hit the scale button there. So we'll hit scale. And you got to select something or it'll do something. So I just up arrowed and moved it. Now I'm going to scale it so that we can see it on the screen. All right, my options are to recover, an automatic recover. Okay, you can't do an automatic recover. You have to recover because remember, this is the one we did with the mount point, and it shows you right there on the screen that it's looking for this mount/backup. So we'll hit recover, and it'll boot up and give us some more options. And it's actually ready. You just hit OK, type root, and leave the password blank. Now you can't run the recover because you don't have the mount point set up yet. So if you look at mount, there's no backup there. So you have to make the directory first. Then you have to mount the cifs volume the same way you mounted it before. And we're still on the rescued disk of the rear backup. So once we get this backup mount established, we'll be able to go in and start the restore. So I'm going to mount it with the IP address, and let's leave out the password. should prompt us for the password. Nope. It wants the password too. All right, so apparently the mount command within the rescue disk wants to use the IP address instead of the name. So if I look in mount backup, I can see all the folders there. Oh, it's recover. The command is recover. Rear recover. And you have to be very careful with this. You have to look at these questions that it's asking. This one is asking to confirm disk mapping, so I press 1 and hit enter. The next one says confirm the layout and continue, so I'm going to do 1 for that. The next one says to recreate the swap, but if I hit 1, it says view. I want to continue, so that's 4. The one says confirm and continue for number 1. Comes up and it recreates the partitions. And it asks me confirm and continue. I'll hit 1. So it's going and it's pulling the backup.tar.gz file and it's restoring the files. All right, confirm to hit OK and bootloader. So I will 1 to confirm. And again, you have to read each one of these because they'll change the numbers around. So you think you're saying yes, and it'll do something different. Running exit task, finish recovered. So I will reboot. And when it does the restore, it puts a file in the root that lets SE Linux know that it has to relabel. So SE Linux will come up and it'll relabel and it will reboot again, and then it'll come up correctly. So there's the options there for the relabeling there, the sec label, whatever that means. And then it goes and it reboots. And we're back at our login screen. So we go to login. This is Fedora. Back to here, and we're looking for 001. And we do a control F5 to force it to reload. You can see that we still have our web server with Nginx running on it, and it's got the modification that we created there. So we took a VM that we created on a KVM hypervisor. We did a backup of it, and we restored it to an XCP-NG hypervisor. So this is good for backups and it's good for moving your VMs to different hypervisors. Now I also have a VMware hypervisor. I'm gonna have to do a new window for that. Let's see if I can get to it. VMware there. Certificate errors again, that's fine. I'm gonna go in as root. Gonna try to type the right password on the first try. Oh, that's not. Oh, I got it on the first try. Now, VMware, it doesn't do the remote storage, so you have to copy the ISO file to the local storage on the VMware machine. So I'm going to go into the browser. I have a folder called ISO. I'm going to upload a file from our home ISO folder. And the file is rear srv002. We're going to select it. And here's the indicator of the file being transferred. All right, then we'll hit close. And we'll go create a new VM. So we create a new VM, create a new virtual machine, and we'll hit next. Gonna call it srv002. It's gonna be Linux. It's going to be that was Alma Linux, so we'll go CentOS something. We'll go CentOS 8. We'll go next. We want to store it there. We'll go next. All right, 1 CPU. We want 4 gigs of RAM. The hard disk is fine. The original was 12 gig. This is 16. We want to put it on VLAN 40. We want to select an ISO file for it to boot from, which is the rear server 2. Select. For VMware, you have to go under the options. There's something in here. Let me find out where it is. You have to tell it that it's not a EFI because it wasn't EFI on the original box. So that's fine. Then we hit next. Gives you a summary. You hit finish. And it says completed successfully. And SRV02 is here. Click there and I can start it and get to the console, and it boots immediately. Now for this one, since the ISO has the backup file on the ISO, we can select the automatic recover option. So we just hit automatic recover, and it'll boot, and then it will copy it'll create the partitions and volumes, and then it'll copy the files from the backup TGZ file that is in the backup folder, and it will reboot again. Confirm the mapping. I don't want to confirm. I want automatic. So I'll hit confirm. Again, you have to pay attention to what it says. 1, confirm, recover. Confirm is 1. Now it's restoring from the CD. Confirm it's okay to recreate, which is one. Option 3 says reboot, so I will reboot. I get my Alma Linux splash screen. It should come up and do the relabel thing. That relabeling is something to do with SE Linux. Once it does that relabel, it will reboot again. This one tells you it's relabeling stuff. And it reboots again. And we get back to our login screen. This is an Alma Linux box, so Alma. So if I look at it, well, it's my Alma Linux 8.5. If I go back and look at it over here to see if the web browser, if the web server is still running, server 02, and you have to control F5 to force it to refresh. And it did refresh, and you can see that we're still having our Alma Linux on server 2. So there's an example of the relax and recover backup system. The actual files that you need are a package that you can download on most Linux distributions. The RPM ones are there, the Alma Linux, Rocky, Red Hat, Scientific Linux. You can back up and restore. Thanks for watching. Please click the like button. I'll see you on the next video.